Hello and welcome to the Healing Insight podcast, episode 31, with me, Sarah Hunt.
And me, Jez Hunt.
Hello and welcome everyone to episode 31 already. And we're definitely moving into the autumn, aren't we, Jay? I've noticed a real drop in temperature in the last 2 or 3 days. Certainly down here in Bedfordshire. Don't know what it's like in Leicestershire, but I'm sure you can fill us in.
I'm still wearing shorts.
Oh my goodness, you wear shorts in the winter anyway.
Well, maybe not quite winter, but yeah, I mean, quite often well into October. But
I've got my jumpers out now.
well, excuse me, I have got a jumper on, and we haven't put the heating on though. So
No,
it's well too early for the heating yet.
Yeah, not the 1st of October yet, is it?
Exactly.
Oh, dear. Okay, so today we thought we'd look at why do we attract unhealthy relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is quite a topic that probably all of us have experienced in one way or another, and it may not have been an intimate relationship. It might have been a work relationship or a friendship that's become unhealthy. But what is unhealthy in a relationship? How would you describe it?
In this context, in terms of unhealthy and relationships, then I would say it's a relationship that's no longer serving you. It's something
absolutely.
Something that doesn't bring you joy or comfort or friendship or closeness or intimacy or whatever it is that relationship was giving you.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me as well, unhealthy relationships, there's a spectrum. So they can be a bit kind of unhealthy in that, there's the odd argument, the odd upset, but you kind of find a way through it, towards really what I would call toxic, where there's a lot of control and coercive stuff going on, and maybe things like gaslighting going on as well. So it's not, to me, a relationship can be unhealthy purely and simply because you're not communicating with each other properly and not understanding each other. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to part your ways, but it's not serving you in the way that perhaps it could serve you to help you to move forward. Also, in my line of work, certainly the way that I look at things is that these relationships, we attract these relationships because actually the universe is a mirror, and it's flagging up really important stuff for us to be looking at in ourselves, and we need to be going, is that a bit of me in there? Do I need to look at that? Do I behave like that? Is it something that I need to address in myself? And often I found that if it's something that's being flagged up to me that I need to address, once I've addressed it, I don't attract people in the same way, or the person that was flagging that up to me, either the relationship improves or they kind of drift off into the distance, and we kind of move on our pathways.
Yeah, I think there's another layer to that I'd like to add to that. So I think you're right. We are in situations in our life, in relationships and other places, for things to be mirrored to us that we need to look at and address within ourselves. I also think it goes a little bit more as well, that we manifest all the time. So if we are focused on something negative, or we're focused on controlling, and this can be unconsciously, not necessarily consciously, then we can attract those people to us. So if we're so for example, when I started drinking at age, well before I was legally allowed to, hey ho, back in those days, we didn't have ID in the same way as we do now, and very many landlords turned a blind eye. Anyhow, yes. I ended up mixing with people that led me down a path of being out drinking regularly when I shouldn't be. that was unhealthy for me. But the more I did it, the more of that type of person I attracted. So I might have jumped from one group of people to drinking to another group of people, but I was still out drinking. So because that's where my mindset was, I was attracting those people to me. Now, the reason I say that is because, for example, if I've been in a narcissistic relationship, if I've been in a relationship with a narcissist, someone who's narcissistic, who is completely and utterly controlling, and they have no concept of what it is about sharing a relationship. It's all about what they want and what their view is of everything. Yeah, if we take it to a degree, a nth degree, then that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily narcissistic. It means I could be controlling in to some level, and maybe we are, and maybe this isn't necessarily the best example to use, because maybe we are all controlling to some degree under some circumstances. But that mirroring to me, and me drawing in a narcissistic person into a relationship, doesn't mean I'm necessarily narcissistic and have to look at those sort of traits that a narcissist would commonly have.
I would like to suggest that because of the way that the universe mirrors things, that sometimes we need stuff highlighted in a really big way to us. So a narcissist would come in and be very, very controlling and perhaps very manipulative in a big way to show us that there's still a little bit of us that is controlling, that can be manipulative. I'm not saying that's always the case, but it can be like that sometimes. For us on a soul level to recognize those traits in ourselves, we need it blown up really big in front of us.
Yeah, okay, that's a valid point.
But it could also be, and certainly I've found that with clients that I've worked with, where there's an entanglement of energies for many, many lifetimes, and so it's like being on elastic. They get pulled back to that same person and have the same issues over and over again, because you've actually got to stand up to them and say, no, this isn't acceptable. I'm worth more than that. I'm not going to allow you to do this to me anymore, and I'm not accepting it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So extrapolating that out, someone who continually attracts the same type of character in a friendship relationship part, because I mean, you could be controlled and manipulated by a friend, not necessarily intimate.
Absolutely,
an intimate
yes,
relationship.
I've certainly experienced that.
And then that's because you haven't cleared whatever it is, you haven't dealt with whatever it is that, and so it continues to happen to you because it's like, no, come on.
Yeah, you've got a lesson to learn here, and it might be that your lesson is to actually stand up and say, no, I'm not accepting this behavior anymore.
Yeah,
This
because
is not acceptable.
particularly in that environment or that scenario, then it's disempowering. They're taking the power away from you, or you're allowing your power to be taken away from you. So by standing up to that and saying, actually, no, enough, done, then that's now taking your power back.
Yeah, so it's about, so then you're taking your power back, but then it's being able to set boundaries. It's being able to stand in your own power and stick with it and not allow yourself to be manipulated again, which can be quite difficult, especially in really toxic relationships, the because of the emotional stuff that's gone on, perhaps the patterning and programming that you've come in with, that you've, and the stuff that you've learned from family, going down the line. I sometimes I certainly remember years ago when I was married and wanting to get out of the marriage. I remember saying to our aunt, well, I've made my bed, I've got to lie in it. And that was a belief that I had because of our parents' belief around marriage. And I remember I'd gone to visit this aunt, and she turned around to me and said, no, you don't have to. You can actually deal with it, and don't worry, mum and dad will support you. I'm sure they will. But I needed to hear that, because in my mind I'd made my bed and I've got to lie in it. I'm stuck with it
Hmm.
for however long. So your belief systems, which we've talked about previously, your belief systems can have quite an effect on how you actually are able to deal with a relationship that's not serving you, that's unhealthy.
Yeah. And that's a very important point that just to go back to, as we've talked about belief systems, but we've also talked about beliefs previously as well. Is, these are things that they're not even necessarily ours. They're adopted from somebody else. So in this case, they're adopted from mum and dad or our parents or, other people that we associate with when we're younger.
Mm.
And we can take on that belief. Well, even societal, marriage is for life and all those things, although maybe society doesn't believe that anymore with the divorce rates being where they are and everything. But certainly in our parents' generation, it was you married for life.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where that belief came for me. But it's I also, I also have this belief, this understanding that some people come in for a reason, some for a season, and some
Yeah.
for a lifetime. And those that come in for a reason, there's always something to learn from any relationship you have, whether that's a friendship, whether that's an intimate relationship, whether that's a work relationship. There is always something that we can learn, but we also are teaching other people as well about themselves. So all of the relationships that we have are to help us to come to a greater understanding of ourselves on our journey of self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just different things are shown us in different ways. And whilst we're talking about unhealthy relationships here, remember that when you've got a healthy friendship, when you've got a healthy intimate relationship, those people are reflecting things back to you as well, but they're reflecting all the things you like about yourself
Yeah.
back to you. So if you're with somebody that's very loving, very caring, demonstrative, and you like all of that, then that's because you're like that, and they're traits that you like about yourself. So don't do remember that it's not just the bad stuff that's flagged up to us. It is the good stuff as well, the things that are there to show us that actually you are very loving, you are um very caring, you pay attention to detail, whatever it might be in whatever scenario you're experiencing. It's the universe is always showing us the good and the not so good, and the not so good is to help us to develop, and we need something to work on so that we can move towards reaching our full potential.
Yeah. I mean, just in terms of definition of the good and the not so good,
Yeah.
is it depends on the individual, because I think we mentioned this in the belief systems. You've got beliefs that serve you, you've got beliefs that don't serve you. But the beliefs that don't serve you doesn't mean that those beliefs won't serve somebody else. So
Mm.
it's just looking at this objectively in terms of, what do I want in my life? Is this acceptable behavior towards me? Am I? So the first question, like you said, like we've said, is what's my lesson here? What is it that this person is demonstrating to me that's triggering me that I don't like? How does that show up in other areas of my life? Not in this relationship, but where else does it show up? So that you start going down that route. And we've talked about things like, journaling, meditation, all those sorts of things to actually just reflect, going into your intuition and just reflecting on things. And then the next step is then asserting boundaries or reasserting them if you did assert them in originally, but asserting your boundaries with, if you go back to the boundaries episode, we talked about expecting pushback. Because if the
Yeah.
boundaries weren't there in the first place and you suddenly start putting boundaries in, then they're going to be, whoa, hang on a minute, this isn't whoa, not happy with this. So you could end up with pushback, and that's normal and that's okay.
Yeah.
If anything, it means that you're doing the right thing,
That's the
because
right thing. Yeah,
because if they're not
absolutely.
if they're not happy with it, then they were quite happy tromping all over your boundaries and all over your flower bed, so to speak. So
Yeah.
um, so putting boundaries in place definitely is, to me, is step two in sort of my understanding.
Mm. I think as well, it's recognizing what you feel is acceptable and what you feel is
Yeah.
not, because what I would find is acceptable behavior somebody else might not, and that'll
Yes.
be because of the journey that each person's had. And and I know in my own experience, I've taken a lot that I shouldn't have done, because I was a bit of a people pleaser when I was younger. So I would do what I could to people please and keep the person happy, rather than actually look at it and go, hang on a minute, this isn't acceptable. Whereas now I won't put up with behavior that I would have put up with before. And I would, I would speak up and say, no, this isn't acceptable. I'm not happy with this. Um, and I think that, that's part of the growth and development as a human being, and as on so many levels that I've gone through over the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
It's where I've been sort of consciously aware of the growth and development, and it's an important part of the journey is to look back at where you were to where you are now. And that's what I always do with my clients, is say to them, look at where you were, whatever point of time it needs to be, and look at where you are now. See how you've progressed. See how you don't accept things in the same way. You do question, or you do assert yourself, or you make sure the boundaries are in place, that kind of thing. Because all the experiences that we have help to create who we are and what we attract now.
Yeah.
And then what we attract now, it kind of moves us forward, doesn't it? So, and it's accepting that, although I talked about the good and the not so good earlier, really it's accepting that there is always something positive to come from every situation, even the ones that cause us a lot of heartache, because everything is neither good nor bad. It's just a learning experience.
Yeah.
And that's the way I try to put it to my clients, so that they can see the positive in it. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is a learning experience. And what's important is that we learn from it. And when we learn from something, we put the changes into place that need to be put into place, so that we don't keep repeating the same thing. Because if we keep repeating the same problem, or keep attracting the same type of people in, where we've not dealt with the behaviors and done something to change things, then the universe will keep sending them to us, so that until it smacks us in the face, we go, hang on a minute, I really am not going to put up with this time.
Yeah. I think there's the recognition of this isn't acceptable to me. And I think in part that tends to come more easily with wisdom, with life experience. So the older we get, certainly in my experience, in my life, the older I've got, the more clear I've become about what I will accept, what I won't accept, and putting boundaries down straight away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any sign of anything I don't like, or I've said I am not accepting that in my life anymore, then for me it's a see ya. It's just not going to happen. So some of that comes with wisdom. I think the other thing is that we could recognize I'm not happy with this behavior towards me from a partner, a friendship, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean we've got the courage or the conviction or the self-belief to actually say, excuse me, but no, that's not going to happen. And so we might become aware of it, but not have that understanding and security within ourselves that I feel I have now compared to when I was, say, in my 20s.
Yeah.
To be able to say, actually, no. And I absolutely will, and I absolutely have. In the last few years, I've met people where I've just been, sorry, but no, it's not going to happen. Back in my 20s, I might have tried to wriggle out of it, walk away from it, or maneuver around it, but I wouldn't necessarily have turned around and said, actually, no.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have.
So,
I certainly wouldn't have.
so I think some of it is wisdom and experience, and some of it is understanding. But if you've got an understanding that it's not acceptable and you're not prepared or not feeling able to do something about it by putting your boundaries down, then again, that's an indicator that your self-worth needs looking at, and you need to look at the things that are around that and why you don't feel comfortable in yourself to say, actually, I'm a 100% me. I'm an individual. I have my rights as much as anyone else does, and this is not acceptable behaviour for me. To me, I will not accept this behaviour from you towards me.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. Yeah, it does make sense. But it's still important to, whilst you're saying and being assertive about the behaviour to somebody else, you also still need to look at yourself and say, do I ever behave like that? Is it something that I need to address in me? And if you address it in you, it will disappear often. It will disappear in the other person because you don't need that highlighting to you anymore. So it's kind of a combination, isn't it, of
Yes.
and addressing it might just be putting the boundaries in place. It might be because you need to look at the boundaries that you have set or not set, to change the energy of it all, to stop that behavior. But it's we need to look at ourselves as well as look at the behavior, and also to remember it's not the soul, it's not the person, it's the behavior that's not
Yes.
acceptable.
Yeah. I think it's also sometimes it can be as simple as just recognizing it. Oh,
Yeah.
ah, I perhaps do that on occasion. Okay, I'm aware of that now. I'm now not going to do that, or whatever, and
Yeah.
just acknowledging. Okay, hands up, that's me. Maybe not to that degree, but and being. I think this is something else as well that I've learned, and particularly with what I do, is we in human form we can be very reluctant to examine our own faults and look at our own faults. The word that's coming up for me is denial, but I don't necessarily mean we deny it, or do I? I must do. Yes,
Well, yeah.
we didn't. I think there can be elements of denial going on. Certainly for me, actually, if I think back, then yes, I do mean denial in that sense. So
Do
behaviour
you know
that
what? Denial. I heard something really
gone.
interesting the other day with denial. Sorry to butt in, but just while I remember it, denial. Don't even know I'm lying to myself.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I thought, don't even know I'm lying. I thought, yeah, that's so true, isn't it? When you're denying something, you're lying to yourself. You're not being honest with yourself, let alone anybody else that's around you. And I think that's one of the things that's really important. And it's important when you've got a situation where you've got an unhealthy relationship, is to be honest with yourself
Yes.
about the situation. And because if you can't be honest with yourself, you can't be honest with the other person. And I often say to people that come and see me, with who've got relationship issues of some sort, whether that's work, whether it's a friendship, whether it's an intimate relationship, the work that we'll do together will either clear stuff for you so that you have a smoother path ahead and it brings you together and your relationship serves both of you and it becomes healthy again, or it will make you part the ways. And I do warn people that, because it can go one of two ways depending on what it needs to do, depending on what needs healing, what needs to be addressed. But it comes back to being honest with yourself. And I think one of the things that's really difficult and takes a lot of courage, is to be honest with yourself about a situation and about a relationship, but until you can be honest with yourself, you can't really acknowledge the issues and then look at what needs dealing with to move forward. And so many people end up in denial, because they don't want to be honest with themselves. And if you're not happy, and you don't want to let go of a relationship of whatever it happens to be, then you can bet your bottom dollar the other person isn't happy, but you need to admit it to yourself that you're not, so that you can actually look at it and find a way forward, whether that's together or apart.
Yeah, and not go down the blame route, because again,
Yeah.
when we feel under attack, then we often go, so it's the instinct response of fight or flight. You know, we either hide away and head in the sand and allow it to happen to us and just try and ignore it, or we go on attack and we start blaming the other person. It's their fault, it's the things that they're doing to us, rather than and you said this today, but we've also said it previously in various podcasts, where the first place to look is, what's my lesson here? What is this situation actually showing me? To then look at what my part in this is, to then say, okay, so this is my part in this. Is this other person just reflecting that to me, or do they have something that I can help them see, learn, move
Yeah.
forward with?
Yeah, absolutely. Because wherever there is an unhealthy relationship, it's not one person that's creating that.
Sure, sure.
It's both parties, and everybody needs to take responsibility for their part in the situation and look at their part of it, and acknowledge and accept that there is no blame to be put anywhere, because it takes two to make a relationship work, and it takes two for it not to work. So and that's in any kind of relationship. So we all need to take responsibility as well for our part in the situation, and be willing to acknowledge and accept that, and do something about it.
Yeah, yeah. A situation just popped, an example just popped into mind. So where you've got friends who, it always seems that you're the one instigating a conversation or a catch up or a meet, let's meet or whatever, and it always seems to be one way communication, then firstly, it's both of you. At the end of the day, the telephone runs both ways, as Dad used to say. So if they're not contacting you, then maybe it's for you to reflect on that and question, well, is this relationship actually something I really want to hang on to? And if so, why? Because if it was a natural conversation, a natural relationship on an even level, where you're, an equal, that's the word I'm looking for, an equal relationship, then there would be two-way conversation. There would be two-way stuff moving backwards and forwards. It wouldn't just be down to one person always making the contact.
Yeah, and I think that's important to remember, isn't it? And it doesn't matter whether it's a relationship with a sibling, a parent, a friend, or a partner. There needs to be balance. It needs to be coming both
Both
ways.
ways, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Wow. That was deep.
It was, wasn't it? But I think it's an important topic to talk about, because we all experience unhealthy relationships, but there's so much that we can learn from them. But equally, if we're in a really toxic relationship, then it can be difficult to move forward and actually deal with it. But there's lots of ways of getting help with that, and perhaps that's something we can look at in another podcast. But I think it's just important to remember that we have these experiences with people because it's part of our journey. It's part of learning about ourselves. It's part of understanding who we really are, and to remember as well that we're teaching them as much as they're teaching us. So somebody who's teaching us to put boundaries in place, we're also teaching that boundaries are important, even if they don't like them. So and that we should have boundaries in place, and that it's not acceptable to tread all over somebody. So it's always a two-way thing.
Yeah.
It's whether both parties are willing to be open and honest enough with themselves to recognize the lessons that are there.
Yeah. And I think it's also, when you set your mindset, or when you take on board that life is a learning experience, all of this, every single thing is a learning experience, and look at everything as a learning experience, then in a lot of ways that can actually make things a lot easier, in terms of allowing yourself to, facing up to the things you need to face up to, and allowing yourself to explore them.
Yeah.
Because as you were saying, if everything is equal on both people's part, then there is always a learning for you. Then go look for it, go and find it, because that is the solution to the problem, rather than any other form of emotion or action, is
Yeah.
to go and find out what the purpose of that situation was for you to learn whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So life is a fun journey. Well, okay, life is a journey, not necessarily fun in
Well,
all areas, but
well, but the
but
thing is,
always learning.
there's always learning, and if you can step back from the intense situations, and see the learning from it, then that kind of lightens it, doesn't it? It doesn't make it quite so
Yeah,
much of a struggle, for want of a better word. But I think, yeah, I just think, it's important to recognize that we draw these relationships in because there's something to learn, something to develop,
yeah,
so a way for us to develop and be our better selves. And that's really what we want to be, is the best we can possibly be at any moment in time.
yeah, absolutely. And on that absolutely awesome note, I think that's about it for today.
Okay, dokie. Thank you very much for an interesting bit of conversation again, Jay. It's good to catch up with you.
And likewise.
So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.